Welcome to this Thursday edition of Inside India. I'm Sri Jegarajah. Your headlines. Markets are on the move higher after a US trade court struck down President Trump's universal and reciprocal tariffs. Liberation Day, in other words, the Trump administration has appealed the ruling. We'll discuss the implications for trade deals as the US and India continue talks. The US telling India there needs to be fair and reciprocal market access. And as Nvidia posts an earnings beat and a surge in data center growth, we'll discuss India's AI ambitions. Indian markets join us in about 45 minutes' time. It looks as though the benchmarks in India could be part of this not insignificant lift that we are seeing play out in the broader APAC markets. Let's take a look at GIFT Nifty futures, and they are implying 24,840 for the market open. So upside of about 100 points or so. Dollar rupee exchange rate at 85.5560. So we are seeing this narrative play out in a stronger dollar as well, and rupee under pressure to the tune of about 0.2%. We'll get into the federal court and the overturning of the Liberation Day and the reciprocal tariffs in a moment, but because that really seems to be the main thematic in the market on the upside. In the meantime, we got industrial output data last night from India, growing by 2.7% on year in April. Reuters poll of economists. We're expecting it to be 1% output of capital and consumer durables-led growth this time around. As we said, Asian markets looking sharp with a few exceptions in Southeast Asia, Straits Times and Malaysia not quite playing ball with the positive narrative. Neither is New Zealand. However, we are seeing the North Asian markets respond very positively to the news that a US federal court blocked President Trump's Liberation Day tariffs from going into effect. We've got the Nikkei and the Kospi up by about 1.7%. As we said, all this comes in reaction to the news that we got overnight from the US. A US trade court blocked President Trump's so-called Liberation Day tariffs from going into effect. Court of International Trade says the president's tariff policies go against federal law as he exceeded his authority with his use of emergency powers. This essentially would put Trump's tariffs on hold from the universal 10% duties. The Trump administration has appealed the ruling, saying judges can't decide how to address, quote, a national emergency. In the meantime, when it comes to India, the US State Department calling for reciprocal market access. US Deputy Secretary met Indian Foreign Secretary in Washington. At the meeting, the US reiterated the importance of fair and reciprocal market access to economic growth. This comes as the two countries sped up trade negotiations. Let's get to an analysis now. Stephen Blitz joins us, Chief US Economist at Global Data TS Lombard. Stephen, great to have you on the programme. Let's start with the market reaction. Do you feel that the markets are way over their skis with pricing a tariffs-off scenario, given the Trump administration and the White House has appealed this ruling?
Yeah, they are. If we've seen the pattern, Trump, first of all, Trump is very good at understanding and how to play the courts and get what he wants in that regard in terms of playing for time. So the first thing he will probably do is emergency appeal to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court wanting to get a ruling from them that basically says you can keep these tariffs in place while the appeals process runs through, right? And we've seen that on some things where he's won and some things where he has not won. So I think the idea that, first of all, this is going to get tossed out by the Supreme Court or not, I think my own view, it probably will. I think his liberal political use of everything being an emergency when it's not. Is it a problem for the U.S.? It is, but it's not an emergency. So, so anyway, Supreme Court will probably come in and say these tariffs can stay in place while the appeals process goes on, and the appeals process can take some time.
So this is where the constitutional, the legal, the trade, the rubber all hits the road all at one point. And we do know that President Trump and the White House is going to appeal this decision. This is going to be a battle royale in the courts. And this is only going to spell more volatility and uncertainty, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And, stepping a half step away from the international economic obvious implications of this, this really gets to, his reaction to this, and what happens is something that's been brewing here ever since he's taken office, which is, will he yield to a court ruling or not? Or will he ignore it? Will he use the power of his own immunity to basically say, you can't come get me and I'm going to do what I want? This constitutional crisis has been on the low boil here, so to speak, on a number of different issues. And this may very well end up bringing it to a head. Not in the next day or two, and not in the next week or two, but this is certainly something that's there. It's interesting. If you think about it, it takes longer to get these things through Congress. But with the Republican Congress, and with these changes that he wants to get through, he would have been better off legislating rather than going through executive order, because then what he does, the permanence of what he does, would last, as opposed to these executive orders, because then the next president that comes in, Republican or Democrat, can simply reverse them. Now, the argument would be that once you're getting $200 billion in revenue, no president's going to reverse it, but one can. So the shortcut, which is, really about performance, which we know performance is a big part of, Trump's presidency, and Trump himself, really, is a big aspect of this. And so, I think that this king-like executive order was always going to, at some point, run into the courts. And, this is where, the difference between being a monarchy and being a constitutional democracy is the legal system. It's interesting, even that overturning it was the Humphrey rule, about they just did about firing these people. The Humphrey rule was put in by Republican conservative justices to push back and hold back FDR's attempt to make himself king-like. So we'll see.
Shades of Henry VIII, Cardinal Wolsey, and the Reformation, without going into a history lesson, Steve, I know this is going to involve some degree of prejudging the outcome, but one scenario, if President Trump's appeal is successful, and we've discussed how that timeline may be very fluid, then does this remove a major volatility driver for the macro and the markets, and is the path then clearer for businesses to start hiring and redeploying capital?
I'd like to say the answer to that is yes, okay? But the removal of using this particular avenue for tariffs, because remember that Section 232 and 301 levies were kept in place.
Yes.
So the problem he's trying to solve doesn't go away by the court saying that he can't just claim this as an emergency. This is an unconstitutional use of this particular emergency power, in effect, that he was granted, since the power of tariffs belongs to Congress. So now it becomes a longer road. Is that less or more volatile if he then goes to Congress and says, you know what, we're gonna go through it this way, or if he just ignores the court completely? We still have TikTok. The Supreme Court said we had to get rid of it. So this is and how much more or less volatile is it, and how much more or less does it attract or repel investment in the United States if he decides to ignore the ruling of, if let's say he goes to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court rules against him.
I hear
So
you.
I would say
Stephen,
it's a twist and a turn. It's not the end.
agree with that. And where then does that leave this plethora of trade deals that are currently very actively under negotiation, including potential proposed agreements like the US-India BTA? Are these negotiations then going to have to be suspended until the White House appeals process runs its course? Or does this give Washington's trade partners perhaps some leverage and an upper hand in talks, since reciprocal tariffs, once the 90-day pause period elapses, may be invalidated?
Well, I think that knowing Trump, I think they will stay in place. And he can negotiate tariffs and then take those tariffs and bring them to Congress and have Congress vote on them. So it just means he can't impose it, or perhaps he can find a way around the law that says we're going to impose this until Congress approves or doesn't approve. So I would say that the negotiations will go on. And I think that therefore, that it means that you could have, and let's be honest, a lot of these countries do have very one-sided tariff agreements with the U.S. to protect domestic industries. Let's pick on Europe because it's sort of a neutral, given we're here in India, talking about Asia, but let's pick on a neutral target like Europe. They have a lot of protective tariffs to protect their own industries, and India does as well, especially in agriculture and in dairy. And so it's a let's just say this about these negotiations. It took Carla Hills 5 years to negotiate a trade agreement with Japan. And about the Uruguay round and all these global, trade. These things are notoriously slow, tedious. The idea that in a week you can just negotiate, something like this so quickly is silly. And in addition to that, he needs Congress right now. He needed the House. He only got his budget passed by one vote. It's now in the Senate, and there's a lot of resistance to different parts of this budget.
Yes.
He has to keep these markets afloat. The danger in terms of his rhetoric, or maybe danger is probably not the most politic word to use, but the shift to a more aggressive stance on these tariffs and on trade negotiations will be greater once this budget deal is signed. And he's got July 4th as the target date. Yeah.
Stephen, all the while, it's been a really interesting conversation in this part of the world. We've seen partnerships, we've seen diversification, we've seen a consolidation in the relationship between China, Southeast Asia, and the GCC. How is China emerging out of all of this? Because you've got a relative picture of dysfunction in the US. And on the other hand, China seems to be, and the perception seems to be over here, that China is emerging as the deal maker, as a free trade champion. Is this going to continue to really damage perceptions of the US? And is this going to continue to cause a flight of capital out of the US markets and elsewhere?
Well, there's two answers to that question. I think, the flight of capital outside the U.S. markets is not exactly a fair statement, in the sense that you had this ridiculous flight into markets, into the U.S. markets versus other countries, the rest of the world. And by most measures, if you go back to the end of 2024, which now seems like it was 20 years ago, most people said that there was an overinvestment in U.S. assets. So you can look at it more broadly and say, is this really a flight out or just a rebalancing towards something that makes a little bit more sense? So, but I think the first point you bring up in terms of the politics of it, I think is very critical. I think there's a reason why he's been very quick to move to India, to Vietnam, to Japan, to South Korea, to the Philippines. It's really, in terms of negotiating trade agreements, much more aggressively than he's been, say, with Europe.
Yes.
And it's because China and even Trump and the U.S. understand, and I should add Taiwan into that, understands that controlling trade or having good trade negotiations and good trade relations is critical in terms of maintaining the balance of power between China and the U.S. And both are playing that game. I mean, if you go back to the Soviet world, right, India was infamous or famous, depending on how you want to look at it, in being neutral state and yet managing to play off the Soviets and the U.S. to get benefits from both. And
Stephen,
this ring of countries are going to do the same with China. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, not at all. Fascinating conversation. Ultimately, are you going to be tinkering with your growth expectations, with your forecasts for headline GDP for the United States? The dollar was quite a curious reaction, wasn't it? What did that tell you? And where then does this leave the Fed if there is going to be a continued high degree of uncertainty and volatility in the macro markets?
Well, I think the Fed answer is the easiest one, right? Because the Fed is basically, using a Taylor rule type model. The funds rate is where it should be. So until they see a break, and you saw that in the minutes, until they see a decisive break in one direction or another, in other words, to much higher inflation or higher unemployment, they're not doing anything. And what is unsaid, even though they talk a lot about inflation, is that the barrier to hike is a lot higher than the one to ease. So, because any jump in inflation, they'll say, well, it's a one-time tariff thing, and that'll work its way out. They don't want to kill the economy, so they're not going to jump and raise and hike interest rates as a result. So they're gonna pull back on. So they're where they are until there's something one direction or the other. As far as the economy is concerned, I started this year thinking that we were either going to have 1% growth or 3% growth, depending on whether Trump's actions sort of really got the competitive juices going. Animal spirits, as the expression goes. And he hasn't, because no one's going to commit to a major cap. They'll give lip service to it. They'll give them something to talk about and things like that. And there are plans here and there, but the kind of real uplift in capital spending in terms of reshoring, it's going to be very difficult to get firms to really generate a massive amount of capital spending in that direction when there's volatility in what the policy is finally going to lay and where it's going to end up. And two, exactly. You don't even have certainty what policy is going to last. And that's the problem with presidency by executive order in a constitutional democracy. There would be more sense of permanence if he legislated it. And yes. I admit, if you legislate, it's long, it's messy, it takes a lot more time, it's a lot more difficult. But by the end of 4 years, he'd have something that he wants. Right? Even maybe at the end of 2 years.
This is yet going to be another volatility driver.
Exactly.
Stephen, on that note, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for joining me, sir. Stephen Blitz there from Global Data TS Lombard. Thank you, sir. Right, we continue to track how this court ruling and injunction against Trump's tariffs, Liberation Day tariffs, reciprocal tariffs, call it what you want, could affect ongoing negotiations. Lin joins us. And Lin, how does this dynamic now affect the US-Japan trade deal?
Well, Sri, I think a couple of things here. First, the timing is very interesting because that trade court decision ruling that basically his so-called Liberation Day tariffs are invalid has come just a day prior to what we expect to be the fourth round of talks between Japan and US. And also, I might add just some of the comments from your last guest there, Stephen Blitz, echoing what I'm hearing as well from trade analysts, that this is by no means over for the US president, and that in all likelihood we could get a situation where the tariffs will continue on until the appeals process is done away with, and that could be a very long time. But again, this could mean extra leverage here now from Tokyo's perspective, right? Because prior to this ruling, all we've been really hearing is all the things that Japan is potentially going to be offering up as part of the trade talks. Certainly today we are getting reports from local media that the US has asked Japan to pay more for the about 50,000 US troops that are stationed in Japan. Minister Akasa Air, who is the point man for these trade talks, he was asked about it by reporters today, Sri, and he said that national security matters, trade, they should be separated. But we watch out for sort of what will come out of these talks ahead.
So regardless, Tokyo has got some leverage perhaps on the face of it, but the US and Washington is going to keep that pressure up. Lynn, thank you very much indeed for that. Coming up, we'll track the top global headlines of the morning and French President Emmanuel Macron's visit to Southeast Asia when we return. Watching inside India, some of the stories we're keeping tabs on outside of India. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced that Hamas's Gaza chief Mohammed Sinwar has been killed. Sinwar was the younger brother of Yahya Sinwar, the militant leader behind the October 23 attacks, who was killed last year. He was reportedly targeted in an Israeli strike earlier this month. Netanyahu called this a major step towards defeating Hamas, but the group has not confirmed his death yet. The US will start aggressively revoking visas for Chinese students, including those tied to the Communist Party or studying sensitive tech. Secretary of State Marco Rubio also said they will step up scrutiny of all future visa applicants from China and Hong Kong. It comes just days after the administration ordered US embassies globally to stop scheduling appointments for student visas. And billionaire Elon Musk is leaving the Trump administration after a short but turbulent stint as a special government employee. He led a push to cut federal spending under the newly created Department of Government Efficiency. Comes a day after Musk criticised Trump's massive budget bill, saying it would undermine his work with Doge. In a post on X, Musk thanked Trump for his time at Doge. A White House official says Musk's offboarding, that's what they call it, begins tonight. French President Macron's tour of Southeast Asia continues, with Indonesia being the latest stopover. Let's bring in JP Ong, who joins us with more. And JP, it's fascinating, we were talking about this earlier, how the dynamics of this relationship really mirror what's playing out in India, especially with defence being a big component.
And it's also important because you have to remember Prabowo Subianto, the president of Indonesia, is a former general. So defence and upgrading the military is very close to his heart, which is also something that President Emmanuel Macron wants to actually push. Now, currently Indonesia actually has an order to buy 42 Rafale fighter jets from France alongside two other Scorpion submarines actually to upgrade their Air Force and Navy. And this time around, they've now inked a defense pact where Macron says it could lead to the additional purchase of more fighter jets from France. Now, we do know Indonesia has said that they need to upgrade their military actually because they're still depending on what they call outdated F-16s and also Russian aircraft. And now the French component actually comes in here. The other thing they also negotiated was Eramet, the French miner, perhaps participating more in nickel development in Indonesia actually. So again, this is also an interesting thing where they're also trying to deepen this. But the more interesting thing here also, Sri, is the fact that both presidents have actually commented on states in Israel and Gaza. Now, we know that Indonesia has for a long time actually not recognized Israel as a state, but this time around, Prabowo said he is ready to formalize diplomatic relations with Israel, but only if Israel recognizes Palestine's statehood first, saying that, hey, we are ready to normalize relations, we're also ready to bring in a peacekeeping force to help enforce peace there, actually, but you have to recognize Palestine first. So this is the first time they've tried to go around this, actually. And it also is interesting because it actually is in contrast to the fact that India has been very supportive of Israel's actions in recent times. And we've also seen Israel commend India for Operation Sindoor, actually. So you're seeing these new geopolitical developments in Indonesia that's happening here as well in this part of the world.
Excellent analysis, JP. Thank you very much indeed for that. We're back in 2 minutes. Welcome back. We are counting down to the market open in India. This is how we are shaping up. Let's give you the futures picture as a guide. GIFT Nifty futures are projecting an opening number in the region of 24,836. So if that did materialise, then we're looking at upside of about 100 points or so. Dollar rupee exchange rate in the environment of this resurgent dollar, 85.5025. So the Indian rupee under pressure to the tune of about 0.2%. Now then, we are focusing on air travel to and from India. Some good news for Indian travellers. They can now travel visa-free to the Philippines. This comes days after another ASEAN nation, Vietnam, proposed a 10-year golden visa for Indian travellers. CEO of travel booking website Trip.com was on Squawk Box Asia this morning. She talked about the 3 things that made a destination attractive to travellers.
So I think, first of all, visa restrictions needs to be a little bit more friendly. The second one is direct flight. We see travel destinations which have direct flights will always get lots of trajectory. The third one is the safety and also friendliness of the travel destination.
Let's bring in Vinay Dubey now, CEO and founder at Akasa Air. The airline is India's 3rd largest by market share and it's looking to expand into Southeast Asia. Vinay, great to have you on Inside India. Can we start domestically, please? And what are Akasa's expansion plans within India? And are flights to smaller Indian cities commercially viable, in your opinion?
So, Sri, wonderful to be on board. Yes, absolutely. So I'll tell you a little bit about Akasa. We've got approximately 30 aircraft today with almost 200 aircraft on order. So we look at growth in India, not just, something that is exciting for the future, but growth in India really redefines aviation, and growth in India is more here than any other part of the world. So very exciting. I think Akasa's foundation is based on that growth, and we pride ourselves in serving tier 2 and tier 3 cities, which is where we find a lot of growth in the years to come. So absolutely, tier 2 and tier 3 cities are extremely viable destinations for us today and in the future.
Interesting. Can you give us a bit more colour on that, Vinay? And what regions within India, can you name any cities that you are planning to operate out of?
Sure. I mean, just to give you a sense, today we fly to places like Prayagraj, Kochi, Varanasi, Ahmedabad, and the list goes on. So we fly to 23 destinations within India, 23. And we fly to 5 international destinations. And so, almost any tier 2 or 3 city that you look at in India is a large city, right? We've got multiple cities with over 1 million people. And so, we're in this golden age of aviation, this golden age of growth in India that it's for multiple years ahead of us. And extremely exciting to be able to fly from, let's say, the metros, the 6 metro cities into multiple tier 2 and 3 cities.
And what about outside India? Because as I understand it, Akasa flies to Abu Dhabi. The GCC corridor with India is very, very active. Visa restrictions, as we were reporting earlier, in several ASEAN countries are being relaxed. What are your ambitions then to expand beyond India?
Yeah, so we do fly to 5 cities. We fly to Abu Dhabi, Doha, Jeddah, Riyadh, and Kuwait. And that's just because, we've got only approximately 30 aircraft today. We have plans to fly northwards, whether it's, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. We have plans to fly east of India, whether it is Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, as was just talked about a little while ago on the show. Certainly, Thailand, Singapore, as well as East. We've got a great plane. We've got brand new 737 MAX. These are extremely strong in terms of missions. We can fly from India to the east coast of Africa, so Tanzania, Egypt, Kenya. These are all possibilities. And Indians really want to travel abroad while we continue to build on the domestic aviation industry and domestic tourism. But there are a lot of Indians that want to travel abroad. And so Akasa is extremely well poised with its 200 aircraft yet to come to fly north, south, east, and west.
It must be a very challenging balancing act, Vinay, because some might say that perhaps Akasa should stick to your knitting within the domestic market. There are such huge growth opportunities there, and this is a market, a domestic market, that remains so underserved. Shouldn't the focus be primarily within India?
Yeah, so the answer is absolutely not. And let me tell you where the stick to the knitting comes in. You stick to the knitting with a single aircraft type, with a single engine type. And once you've got, single class, as far as we're concerned, although I think we're helping, affordable touches of luxury in the servings that we provide our consumers. And so very, very strong focus on service, very strong focus on reliability and on-time performance. But that's really the knitting that we need to stick to. So if we've got a single aircraft type, a single engine type, but it has the capability to fly 5 hours, then absolutely there's no point in restricting this within a 2-hour radius of India, because it is not increasing your cost base as you fly to these international destinations, and it's just expanding your revenue horizon.
Yes.
So I'd say the sticking to the knitting is in terms of the business model that we have.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Vinay. And you touched on the aircraft, your preferred choice of aircraft. And just give us your thoughts on the reliability of Boeing as an aircraft supplier, the current status of the order book, delivery delays, and to what degree these have impacted Akasa operationally and commercially.
Yeah, so I think, a lot has been talked about some of the issues Boeing has faced in the past. I can tell you that those are, from our vantage point, well behind them. You've got an extremely exciting time at Boeing today. We're getting deliveries. In fact, we've got 2 deliveries that we will get in the span of the next, I'd say, 2 weeks. So think about that. 2 additional deliveries coming to Akasa in the span of the next 2 weeks. That should give you a sense that the issues that Boeing have faced are behind us. But let me put things in perspective as far as Akasa is concerned. There's no airline in the 125-odd year history of global aviation that has grown at the pace of Akasa. So if you've got an aircraft or 2 less that comes in a year, actually it's no big deal for us, given that we are sort of setting records that no one has seen in the history of global aviation. So I just want to put that in perspective. But coming back to the issue of Boeing, I think it's very, very exciting times ahead. They've been great partners. They built an excellent aircraft, and we couldn't be happier.
Thank you for that, Vinay. Let's talk about human capital. Correct me if I'm wrong, 775 pilots as of May 2025, over 76% actively flying. Last September, though, there was a wave of resignations, and there's generally been a tussle, hasn't there, for top talent between your airline, Air India, and SpiceJet. Has that been resolved, and has that situation stabilised now on the pilot front?
Yeah, sure. So first, I'll just correct you, Sri. It was not last September, it was September of 2023. So this is sort of old news.
Pardon me,
thank you. 775 pilots for a fleet today of approximately 30 aircraft. If you do the math, you'll find out that we've got more than enough pilots for our current fleet. In fact, we've got more than enough pilots to take us from a growth perspective for the next several years. And so I'd say there's no tussle anymore. We've been, over 5% market share for the last 2 months. We are India's 3rd largest airline. I would say that India puts out, 1,500 odd pilots a year. So at this moment in time, I don't see a pilot shortage, and Akasa's numbers in terms of 770 pilots reflect that. So we're poised not just for what we have today in terms of aircraft count, but certainly poised for this amazing growth that's ahead of us.
Vinay, how big are the challenges domestically in terms of building out the airport infrastructure and connecting these tier 2, tier 3 cities and building out these hubs within India? Because as I understand it, the infrastructure build-out has not been going to plan. There are reports of ghost airports. There are reports of half-completed airport infrastructure. Why isn't it going as planned? And what's going wrong there in terms of the partnership with perhaps government entities?
Yeah, sure. Actually, I have a different take on it, Sri. So when you're building out 140 airports over the course of the last 10 years, and by the way, if you'd had this conversation with me 10 years ago, I would paint a very different picture, much along the lines of your questioning. But over the last several years, we built out 70 already, and there's 70 more that are in the build phase. So when you're building 140 airports over here, it is a sign of very, very substantial investments that our government is making in airport infrastructure, with two extremely large airports that are poised to come online in the course of the next few months, right? And so by July, I think you'll see the new airport in Mumbai. By July, you'll also see the new airport in the greater Delhi area. These are very, very large projects, very essential projects. So my take is that when you've built 140, airports, or you're working on these 140 with 70 built and 70, in the hopper over the course of the last 10 years, you may have a delay on one or two or three. That should not take away from the fact that today, it's not an airport capacity constraint that airlines are facing, which was a very different story 10 years ago. 10 years ago, we were talking about, with all these planes coming, where are we going to fly them? Where are we going to park them? Today, that's not part of the conversation that airlines are having at all.
Got it. Just to round off, Vinay, a couple of questions. How would you describe the pricing environment on the ticketing side, and dovetailing into that, how are you managing the cost base? And have you got a line of sight on what the summer peak travel season is going to look like for Akasa?
Yeah, so plenty of questions there, very different. I'll try and address them one by one, Sri. So first, I'll tell you that demand in India is robust and will be robust for a long, long time. You'll always get a little spike up or a little spike down. But when you look at the fundamentals of Indian aviation, they're extremely strong. We're in the nascent stage here today, and you'll get double-digit growth for the next 20, 30 years as far as Indian aviation is concerned. And so that should give you a sense of what the summer peak looks like. As far as the pricing environment, I think it's an extremely consumer-friendly pricing environment. People will complain from time to time because they're used to very, very low fares. But if you look at the fare environment in India and you were to compare it with the fare environment in Europe, North America, East Asia, I think you'll find, an extremely affordable fare environment in India. And that's part of what is fueling growth. And by the way, as far as Akasa is concerned, we come in with not just the affordability of fares because we were hyper-focused on our cost structure, but like I said, we're extremely focused at Akasa also on service excellence, whether it's on-time performance, the quality of the seats, offering USB ports at every seat, the quality of the food, the brand new aircraft that we have. And so what people should be able to get in India is sort of touches of luxury at an extremely affordable price point with Akasa.
Vinay, always great catching up with you, sir. Thank you very much indeed for those insights on the business. Vinay Dubey there from Akasa Air. Right, we are counting down to the market open in Mumbai. We will check on the early action and also decode what Nvidia's earnings imply for India. Stay with us. Indian markets just joined the trading day and the mood is looking positive, in line with the broader action in the Asian markets following on from this decision in the US federal court, blocking President Trump's Liberation Day tariffs from going into effect. But as we were discussing earlier, there's a timeline on this in terms of appeals and counter appeals, etc. So expect some volatility in terms of this picture. But in the here and now, the Nifty 50 is going with the narrative, which is stay off execution in terms of tariffs. 24,890, so making a run on 25k, up by 0.5%. Rupee is under some pressure against the US dollar, 85.47 on the nose. Markets are buzzing with IPO activity. Indian markets regulator SEBI approving an IPO for Hero FinCorp. Offering is currently valued at around $430 million. Hero FinCorp is the financial arm of one of India's largest two-wheeler makers, Hero MotoCorp. The reaction to this news in Hero Motor shares on your screen, flat at this point in time at 4,365 rupees. Meantime, Leela Hotels owner Schloss Bangalore's IPO closed for subscriptions. The issue was oversubscribed after witnessing muted bidding from investors during the first 2 days. Schloss is targeting a valuation of about $1.7 billion and will start trading on the Indian stock exchanges on June the 2nd. Let's turn our attention to the story that's moving markets today. US tech giant Nvidia reporting its Q1 earnings after hours. Earnings and revenue all a beat. Overall revenue growing 69% in Q1. Nvidia is projecting around $45 billion in sales this quarter, but that number would have been much higher if not for the US export curbs on its China-bound H20 chips. CNBC's Christina Partsinevelos filed this report.
China represents one of the world's largest AI markets, worth $50 billion, according to Nvidia's CEO Jensen Huang. That massive market, though, is now, quote, closed to the company. Despite giving upbeat revenue guidance, Jensen Huang struck a more somber tone on the earnings call, and specifically regarding the H20 chip ban. He said, quote, the question isn't whether China will have AI. It already does. The question is whether one of the world's largest AI markets will run on American platforms. He did warn that export restrictions are backfiring. Competition only strengthens them abroad, quote, weakening America's position. Export restrictions spurred China's innovation and scale. Nvidia does expect $45 billion in the second quarter for sales, which already factors in roughly $8 billion in lost China revenue from export controls. The strong guidance, $45 billion, is powered primarily by Blackwell, Nvidia's latest chip design, which is definitely ramping up production and going through all of those previous delays. Blackwell contributes roughly 70% of total data center revenue, and demand, according to Jensen Huang and the CFO on the call, is very intense. He said that they have more orders today than they did at the GTC conference just in March. The challenge now is that supply is catching up to that massive demand. For CNBC at the NASDAQ, I'm Christina Partsinevelos.
Thank you, Christina. Data center demand was one of the highlights for Nvidia in the last quarter, and they're building one in India. In partnership with Reliance, the two companies had announced a partnership last year to boost AI infrastructure in India in collaboration with Nvidia. Reliance plans to build the country's largest data center, worth $30 billion in Gujarat. Let's bring in Parv Sharma now, senior analyst at Counterpoint Research. Parv, great to have you on Inside India. Let's start with the headline. And does this in any way look like the high water mark, and have earnings peaked or plateaued? And what did you make of the guidance that did come in on the lighter side?
Yeah, I think China has been a significant factor, since now they cannot cater to that $50 billion market. So that has been quite a change for Nvidia. Roughly a $8 billion worth of opportunity lost initially. But in a longer term, if you look, I think China remains a significant market. And if US AI companies can't enter China, I think this will give a significant competitive advantage to China. The export controls haven't worked quite well, and it limits the opportunity for US companies. Overall, I think the guidance is almost in line, slightly below the consensus. But still, I think missing those China revenues, Nvidia still has done better. I think that is pretty much significant on the overall turnovers.
Parv, can India, given time, replace or even eclipse Nvidia's business in China?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I was just thinking about it. So India, I think, already has started with the AI strategy and an AI mission as well. I think hundreds of billions of dollars have been promised. Although it's starting now, it will take quite 5 to 6 years to get there. But there is a lot of digital transformation that is happening in India, and based on, I think, the initial estimates that we have done, at least roughly, I think 10,000s of GPUs would be required initially for getting these AI data centers running in India, specific to the sovereign AI ecosystem. And on top of it, I think there are multiple companies, if you look at Tata, Reliance, that are working on these data centers and already have promised like a gigawatt of data center, I think, currently in India. So I think in a longer term, India does create that opportunity for Nvidia, but I think China is one of the biggest market. I think to be outside of that market, India does give them a play here, but I think China would still be a biggest. I think it will take time for India to get there.
You mentioned sovereign AI, Parv. I would imagine in India with these government digital initiatives, that build-out is going to be quite a significant addressable market opportunity, as will be AI inference, as will be physical AI and robotics. Do you see it the same way?
Yes, surely. I think if you look at India, there is everything is getting digitized. I think we have a pretty big population, and we are already digitizing all the data, whether it is like Aadhaar linked or whether the services which government is offering, everything is moving online. So even I think previously you were talking about the airports and the flights, and in India, I think all the digital airports, if you look at, are getting all this digital entry, and also overall, I think it's a mix because more and more digital ecosystem is being brought in, specifically from a government perspective, and to cater to these bigger population, I think sovereign AI is required, because you cannot have this data going outside of India, and from a privacy security perspective, this all data has to stay in India.
Nvidia has a significant presence in India already. 4,000 employees across 6 locations, partnerships that we were talking about earlier with Reliance, TCS and Infosys for AI-related solutions. So what is the next stage in that build-out and evolution, and what role can Nvidia play in elevating India's ambitions to move up into advanced manufacturing itself?
Yeah, I think I look at it from 2 ways. First is like providing the overall infrastructure. Nvidia will play a key role here, because if you look at most of the GPUs and that are being supplied by Nvidia, and that will help all these companies to set up their data centers specifically to the AI data centers. And the second thing, what can be done is that Nvidia still has a bigger developer base in India, and if you look at government strategies to have a chip being designed in India, I think one thing that can be done is to have a co-developed data center chip in India, along with Nvidia and the Indian government or Indian private entities. I think that would give a big boost, specifically from a intellectual property perspective, the cost effectiveness, big boost to startups, and also it will de-risk the supply chain risk that is currently in the market. So there is a big potential right now, both from a current use perspective and also what can be done in the future.
IT Minister believes India will produce its first domestically manufactured semiconductor chip by December this year, December 2025. Is that realistic and achievable, or does India need more time?
Yeah, I think India has already started, although we have started on the mature nodes, 28 nanometers and below. So that gives us a slight delay from a leading edge nodes. So I think Tata is already there in Dholera, and I think the plan looks optimistic. But again, as it is an initial start, it would be more on the mature nodes rather than a leading edge product.
Parv, great insights. We'll leave it there, sir. Thank you very much indeed for joining me on Inside India. Parv Shalimar there from Counterpoint Research. Thank you. Right, that wraps it up for this show today on Inside India. Tomorrow we are expecting Q4 GDP numbers from India. We'll discuss the growth Outlook with Taimur Baig of DBS Group Research, and keep the AI story going with Indian multinational tech firm InMobi. Don't miss those conversations. That's it for us and all the team on Inside India. Do keep watching CNBC. Dan Murphy is up next with Access Middle East.